What if the man accused of killing Charlie Kirk wasn't the man at all? What if the person closest to him, his own wife, finally admitted something so shocking, so gut-wrenching, that it shook the entire foundation of the story the public was fed? That's where we begin. A crisp Utah evening. The air filled with chatter, anticipation, and the electric pulse of a crowd gathering to hear one of the most polarizing young voices in American politics. Charlie Kirk, just 31 years old, a man who had built his name into a brand, his organization into a movement, stood before his audience at Utah Valley University. He wasn't just another speaker. To his followers, he was a visionary. To his critics, a lightning rod. And to everyone there that day, he was the main event. No one could have imagined that within minutes, shots would ring out, chaos would erupt, and history would take a violent turn. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But here's the part that no one wants to admit. The story we were told in the hours and days that followed may not be the real story at all. Let me ask you this. How many times have we seen an official narrative plastered across headlines, spoon-fed to the public, only to later unravel piece by piece? How many times has the obvious suspect turned out to be little more than a convenient scapegoat? And why? In this case, did Charlie Kirk's widow, his closest confidant, his partner in life and in faith, step forward to say the words no one expected? He wasn't killed by the man in custody. It was an inside job. That line alone changes everything, doesn't it? Picture it. You're standing in the crowd, watching Charlie pace the stage with that mix of fire and calculation. His tone sharp, his delivery practiced, his message designed to spark debate. The audience leaned forward, hungry for the next punchline, the next sting, the next rallying cry. Then, sudden panic. Shouts, gasps, people ducking, phones falling, shoes scraping against concrete as bodies scattered in every direction. Charlie crumpled to the ground. For those who loved him, time froze. For those who loathed him, a sickening disbelief lingered. And within hours, a name was produced. Tyler Robinson. 33 hours after the shooting, police announced that they had their man. The press moved swiftly, painting Robinson as the villain, tying loose threads together in a way that looked neat, easy, and digestible. But truth? Truth is never neat. It's messy, tangled, and often more sinister than we're prepared to face. Think about it. How could Erica Kirk, who had just lost her husband, find the strength to speak publicly, to cut against the grain, to risk being painted as delusional or unstable in her grief? Unless she knew something. Unless she had seen something. Unless she understood a reality the rest of us were never supposed to uncover. And here's where the contradictions begin. Tyler Robinson was supposedly acting alone. Yet there were inconsistencies. Eyewitnesses who claimed they saw multiple figures. Others who swore security presence seemed suspiciously thin that day. Some reported that Kirk had voiced concerns privately in the weeks leading up to the event, worrying about betrayal, about infiltration. Could all of that be coincidence? Or was it foreshadowing of a larger plan in motion? Now pause for a moment. Imagine you're Erica. You've just watched your husband gunned down in front of a crowd. You're ushered into back rooms, whispered to by officials, told to stay strong and trust the process. You watch as news anchors read from teleprompters, your husband's death turned into a spectacle, and then you hear the name Tyler Robinson. Do you feel relief? Closure? Or do you feel something gnawing at your gut, a voice screaming inside you? This isn't right. That's exactly what Erica admitted. Not immediately, but soon enough. Her confession wasn't theatrical. It was trembling, pained, but deliberate. She didn't simply say she doubted Robinson's guilt. She said the unthinkable, that this was orchestrated, that her husband's death was part of something larger, something closer, something inside. Now, before we go further, I want to ask you a question. Why do stories like this hit so hard? Why do they grip us, hold us in place, force us to listen? It's not just the tragedy, it's the betrayal. Because betrayal isn't an act that comes from strangers. Betrayal comes from within. And Erica's words pointed straight to betrayal. As the hours turned to days, social media lit up. Hashtags exploded. Some dismissed Erica as grief-stricken, saying she didn't know what she was saying. Others believed her instantly, citing every hole in the official story. The crowd divided. But deep down, whether you believed her or not, You felt the same chilling realization. If she was right, then someone we haven't seen yet, someone who wasn't in custody, was still out there, and still untouchable. Let's rewind to the event itself. Utah Valley University wasn't chosen by accident. It was supposed to be a secure, controlled environment. Security checks, a vetted audience. The entire setup designed to showcase Kirk's message, not end his life. And yet, security failed. Spectacularly. Why? That's the question Erica asked behind closed doors. Why was her husband so exposed? Why was his team unprepared? And why did some of the very people tasked with protecting him seem almost too calm after the fact? The contradictions pile higher. Tyler Robinson's alleged motive was thin, shaky at best. His connections to the event? Minimal. His ability to pull off such a calculated act? Questionable. And yet he was trotted out as the face of evil, a ready-made villain for the cameras. Convenient, don't you think? And here's where Erica's admission slices through the noise. When she said it wasn't Robinson, when she hinted at an inside job, she wasn't just grieving. She was opening a door, one the public wasn't supposed to step through. Because the moment you entertain that possibility, the narrative collapses. If Robinson didn't do it, then who did? And if it was an inside job, then that means people within Kirk's own circle, his allies, his protectors, his so-called family, had turned against him. Now pause. How does that make you feel? Angry? Betrayed? Skeptical? Because that's the reaction Erica's statement drew. But here's the key. Her words didn't just echo in the moment. They rippled. They gained power with every retelling, every clip shared online, every late-night conversation where people whispered, "What if she's right?" I want you to picture the look on her face as she spoke. Eyes hollow from sleepless nights, voice cracking under the weight of loss, hands clenched because grief and anger often wear the same mask. She wasn't just speaking to the press. She was speaking to you, to the audience, to anyone willing to listen. And what she said, stripped of politics, stripped of spin, was a cry for truth. Now, here's the real kicker. Every story has its first act, its build-up. This is ours. The introduction is just the beginning. We've only scratched the surface of what happened in Orem, of what happened inside Turning Point USA, of what Erica saw, heard, and ultimately risked everything to reveal. Because what came next wasn't just suspicion. It was evidence. It was whispers turning into shouts.
Yeah, so if you can let me finish.
Ripping through cracks,
it allowed the Department
allies
of
showing
Justice
their
to
true faces.
go after.
And in that storm, Erica's confession would no longer look like a grieving widow's outburst. It would look like a roadmap to the truth. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. So let's step back into that day. The day of the shooting. The day when an open-air event meant to inspire and energize turned into a scene of chaos, horror, and unanswered questions. Let me ask you, have you ever been in a crowd so electric, so full of energy, that you could feel it humming in your bones? That's what Utah Valley University felt like on that Wednesday afternoon. The sun was starting to dip lower, casting sharp golden rays across the courtyard. Students clustered together in small groups. Parents leaned against railings, curious to see what this young firebrand of the conservative movement would say. Some came as loyal supporters, eager to clap and cheer. Others came out of curiosity, or even hostility, hoping to challenge him, maybe catch him slipping. Charlie thrived on moments like this. He didn't shy away from confrontation. He fed on it. His voice carried over the crowd, sharp, cutting, infused with confidence. We are here today because ideas matter, because freedom matters, because truth matters. He paused, letting the words settle. That pause, that space where breath meets silence, is where he was most dangerous. And then it happened. A sound that didn't belong. A crack splitting the air. Not the crack of applause,
Nice
not
to meet
the
you,
scrape of
Anonymous.
chairs,
Thank you. Nice
but
to meet
something sharper. Metallic. Final. The kind of sound that makes your stomach drop before your brain even registers what it means. People screamed. A woman dropped her phone. Someone shouted, "Get down." Instinct took over. Hundreds of bodies crouched, scattered, ducked behind benches and walls. Panic rippled like electricity, unstoppable, uncontrollable. And in the center of it all, Charlie crumpled. One moment he was standing tall, words hanging in the air. The next, he was on the ground, the microphone skittering across the stage. Do you remember where you were when you first heard about it? Maybe scrolling through social media, a push notification lighting up your screen. Maybe you were at work, hearing whispers from a colleague. Maybe you were one of the unlucky few who witnessed it live. Either way, the moment stamped itself in memory. It wasn't just news. It was shock. And here's the contradiction. How could something like this happen at an event that was supposed to be locked down, vetted, controlled? Where was security? How did a shooter even get that close? Think about that. Universities don't just let anyone wander in with a weapon, especially not at a Turning Point USA event where threats were constant, where security was expected to be airtight. Witnesses described seeing guards hesitate. Some said there was confusion in their movements, almost like they didn't know what to do. Others swore that certain entrances weren't even being monitored properly. Does that sound like coincidence? Or does it sound like failure? Or worse, orchestration? But in that first hour, no one cared about theories. They cared about survival. People ran. People sobbed. Some even fainted under the crush of fear. Parents clutched their children. Students called loved ones, voices trembling. And all the while, medics rushed to Charlie, fighting against the seconds ticking away. Now imagine Erica in that moment. She wasn't on stage, but she was close. She saw her husband fall. She saw the chaos erupt like wildfire. And she felt the world collapse in slow motion. Think about what must have gone through her mind. Not politics. Not headlines. Just one thought. Save him. Save him. But they couldn't. By the time the ambulance carried him away, by the time police started herding witnesses, by the time the crowd's screams turned into sobs and silence, the unthinkable had already happened. And yet, this is where the story twists. Because in tragedies like this, there are always two stories. The one written in real time, chaotic and raw, and the one carefully crafted afterward, neat and palatable for the evening news. The immediate story was simple. Charlie Kirk shot during event. But look closer. The phrasing matters. Notice how quickly details were filled in. Notice how fast a suspect's name was whispered, then broadcast. Doesn't that strike you as odd? A shooting that chaotic, yet within hours, authorities had already narrowed the scope? Eyewitnesses described more than one sound. Some thought they saw two figures near the stage. Others claimed security officers were unusually slow in reacting, as though expecting something. But those voices? They were drowned out. Because official stories need clarity, not confusion. And clarity demands a single villain. Enter Tyler Robinson. But hold that thought. We're not there yet. Right now, focus on the aftermath of the gunshots. Focus on the silence that fell once the screams subsided. That eerie, bone-deep silence that comes only after violence. Witnesses said it felt unreal, like time had stopped. One moment adrenaline burned through their veins. The next, nothing but hollow disbelief. Ask yourself this. If you had been there, would you have trusted what you saw? Or would you have clung desperately to whatever story officials told you afterward, just to make sense of the nightmare? And yet, within that silence, Erica made a choice. She didn't collapse entirely. She didn't let herself drown in shock. She began watching, listening, noticing. And what she noticed would come back later in ways no one could have imagined. But let's not jump too far ahead. Because before Erica spoke, before suspicion took root, before whispers of an inside job spread like wildfire online, the world first had to grapple with one devastating truth. The voice of Charlie Kirk had been silenced forever. Crowds were dispersed. Students were sent home, some still trembling, some still in denial. News cameras swooped in like vultures, circling, capturing the tears, the ambulances, the chaos. Headlines flashed. Charlie Kirk dead at 31. And for many, that was the end of the story. But for those who looked closer, who listened harder, it was just the beginning. Because someone out there knew the truth. Someone out there wanted this to happen. And someone out there had made sure that the chaos of that Utah afternoon would serve as a perfect smokescreen. And in the hours that followed, as Erica's world collapsed around her, the seeds of suspicion were already being planted. But who planted them? And why? Would only become clear when the suspect was named. And when the suspect was named, the contradictions only deepened. The day of the shooting was just the opening act. The real storm was still waiting to break. But what happened in the immediate aftermath would prove even stranger, even darker than the shooting itself. So let's step into that storm. The immediate aftermath. The moments when chaos gave way to silence, and silence gave way to carefully chosen words, press conferences, and headlines that seemed a little too polished, a little too fast. Ask yourself, how long does it really take to process a tragedy like this? Hours? Days? Weeks? For most people, grief is messy, drawn out, unpredictable. But when Charlie Kirk fell to the ground that Wednesday, the story didn't unfold in messy grief. It unfolded like a script. Picture the scene. Medics swarmed, pressing down, shouting commands, trying desperately to keep Charlie alive. Police cordoned off the area, their radios buzzing. Students clung to each other, trembling. Yet, almost as if on cue, reporters started arriving within minutes, their cameras ready, their lines rehearsed. Tragedy at Utah Valley University. Conservative firebrand Charlie Kirk gunned down. Doesn't it seem strange how quickly the machine spun into motion? Meanwhile, Erica was taken aside, her world collapsing. She was ushered into a sterile room, handed tissues she didn't want, offered words that meant nothing. We're doing everything we can. We'll keep you informed. Empty promises in the face of something so raw. And while she sat there, trying to make sense of the senseless, the outside world was already building its version of events. That's the contradiction. Grief is slow, but narratives move fast. Too fast. By the time evening rolled around, less than 6 hours after the shooting, local stations were already quoting unnamed sources. A suspect is in custody. Authorities believe this was an isolated act. But was it really? Witnesses hadn't even been fully interviewed yet. Evidence hadn't been processed. And still, the story had a neat outline. Kirk dead, Robinson guilty, case closed. Do you believe in coincidences? Or do you believe in convenience? Because for many watching, something didn't add up. Students on social media contradicted the reports. Some insisted they saw multiple shooters. Others swore they saw security personnel behaving oddly, deliberate, almost staged movements. But those posts? Many of them disappeared within hours, flagged, buried, or quietly removed. And here's the emotional punch. Imagine being one of those students. You saw something, you tried to tell the world, and suddenly your words vanish. Wouldn't that make you question everything? Wouldn't it make you wonder if the truth was being smothered before it had a chance to breathe? Now, here's where it gets darker. Within 33 hours, police paraded out a name. Tyler Robinson. A man the public knew nothing about. A man who seemed, on the surface, like the perfect villain. Disconnected, troubled, disposable. The kind of man whose arrest would calm the crowd, satisfy the headlines, and silence the questions. But wait, does that timeline make sense? 33 hours to investigate a campus shooting, interrogate witnesses, gather evidence, process ballistics, confirm motive, and lock in on one man? Or does it sound like a story waiting for a scapegoat? This is where Erica's silence broke. Behind closed doors, she began whispering doubts. At first to those closest to her. Then, slowly, to the wider public. Her words were hesitant, grief-stricken, but unmistakable. It wasn't Robinson. Charlie's death wasn't random. It was something else. Something from within. Stop here. Think about that. A widow, fragile, broken, raw. Choosing not to accept the easy answer handed to her. Why? What did she see? What did she know? Because grief doesn't invent details. It reveals truths too painful to ignore. And her suspicions weren't unfounded. Consider the inconsistencies. Witnesses recalled security lapses. The shooter's position didn't match where Robinson was supposedly found. And surveillance footage? Conveniently missing segments. Missing footage. Suspicious timing. Contradictory witnesses. Does that sound like an airtight case? Or a cover-up? Now picture Erica watching the news. The anchor's polished smile. The certainty in their voice. Tyler Robinson is in custody. Authorities are confident they have their man. And Erica, in her home, staring at the screen, shaking her head. She knew. Deep down, she knew. And soon, she'd admit it out loud. But before we get to her admission, we have to linger here. Because this is the moment the cracks began to form. This is when the public split in two. Those who believed the official story, and those who didn't. And the louder the officials insisted Robinson was guilty, the more people began to wonder, why are they trying so hard to convince us? It's almost ironic, isn't it? The harder they pushed the narrative, the weaker it looked. And Erica's doubts only added fuel. Because when the widow refuses to play along, when the person with the most to lose refuses to nod and smile, the story begins to unravel. The immediate aftermath wasn't just about chaos and grief. It was about control. Who controlled the narrative? Who controlled the evidence? Who controlled the public's attention? And in those first 33 hours, while Erica wept, while students trembled, while America gasped, someone else was pulling strings. And the strings didn't lead to Robinson. They led somewhere else entirely. But where those strings led, and whose hands were tugging them, wouldn't be revealed until Erica finally shattered the silence. And when she did, the world would never look at this case the same way again. Let me ask you something. How many times have we seen this play out before? A high-profile killing, chaos in the streets, and then, like clockwork, a suspect is paraded before the cameras. Neat, tidy, digestible, case closed. But is life ever that neat? Is truth ever that tidy? Tyler Robinson was the perfect suspect, precisely because he wasn't perfect. A 29-year-old from the Salt Lake City area. A man with a checkered past, minor run-ins with the law, nothing major, but enough to paint him as unstable. News outlets latched on immediately. Troubled loner. Radical drifter. The labels rolled out like they were written before his name was even announced. But here's the contradiction. Witnesses swore the shooter was taller. Others said the shooter moved with military precision, something Robinson had no record of. Some even claimed Robinson wasn't anywhere near the immediate chaos, but was picked up blocks away, confused, dazed, almost as if he'd been planted. Convenient, right? Now pause. Imagine being Robinson. You wake up one morning, another nameless day in a life riddled with mistakes. By nightfall, you're handcuffed, shoved into a police cruiser, and your face is splashed across every screen in America as the man who murdered Charlie Kirk. Do you fight? Do you scream? Or do you go silent, knowing no one will believe you anyway? And here's where Erica's doubts matter most. While the public was still processing Robinson's mugshot, while pundits debated motives and political leanings, Erica was already speaking out in private. It wasn't him, she insisted to those closest to her. Charlie knew something. Charlie said he felt betrayed. Betrayal. That word again. It hung in the air like smoke. Think about this. Why did Charlie's closest allies seem so quick to move on? Within hours of Robinson's arrest, Turning Point USA released a carefully worded statement. Justice will be served. We are grateful for swift police action. The words were polished, professional, but cold, almost detached. Was this grief, or was this damage control? Because the more you look at Robinson, the less he fits. His background doesn't scream assassin. His profile doesn't scream mastermind. Instead, it screams scapegoat. Someone plucked from obscurity, thrown into the fire, and burned for someone else's crime. And here's the emotional twist. Erica wasn't just doubting the official story. She was living in fear. Fear that by rejecting the narrative, she would become a target herself. Fear that speaking out would cost her everything. But she couldn't stay silent. Not when the truth gnawed at her. Not when the man in custody didn't match the face she saw in her mind. Students echoed her doubts. Whispers spread online. I don't think it was Robinson. The shooter was taller. Something's off. But mainstream media drowned those voices with polished talking points. Because uncertainty doesn't sell. Certainty does, even if it's false. Let's break it down further. 33 hours. That's how long it took to move from chaos to arrest. Does that sound like justice or choreography? Remember the missing footage? The security lapses? The eyewitness contradictions? All swept under the rug, replaced by Robinson's mugshot. Conveniently, his past mistakes painted him as unstable, making him easy to frame. He couldn't fight back. He had no powerful allies, no money, no platform, just a face the world could hate. But here's the question. If Robinson didn't pull the trigger, then who did? And why was Robinson chosen to take the fall? Was it random? Or was it deliberate, calculated, designed to hide the truth in plain sight? This is where Erica's pain turned into defiance. She began asking questions. Questions others were too afraid to ask. Why was security so thin? Why were certain staff members unaccounted for? Why did it take so long for footage to be released? And why were there gaps in that footage? And most importantly, why did the people Charlie trusted most seem so eager to close the book before it was even written? Now let me ask you, if your spouse was murdered, would you settle for the easy answer? Would you nod politely and let the story stand, even if it felt wrong? Or would you fight, knowing that fight could cost you everything? Erica chose to fight, and her fight began with one sentence. It wasn't Robinson. Those words shattered the illusion. Because if Robinson wasn't guilty, then everything we'd been told was a lie. And lies, once exposed, unravel quickly. But Erica didn't stop there. She went further. She spoke of betrayal, of whispers Charlie shared in the weeks before his death, of warnings ignored. She hinted at something darker, something orchestrated, something from within. And suddenly, Robinson's arrest didn't look like justice. It looked like a cover. The suspect may have been in custody, but the real killers? They were still out there, watching, waiting, untouchable. And as Erica's words began to spread, as her defiance lit a spark, the public began to ask the question no one wanted answered. If not Robinson, then who? And the answer would rip Turning Point USA and everything Charlie built wide open. That question burned in the minds of everyone who dared to doubt the story. And then came the moment that changed everything. The moment Erica Kirk, widow, mother, grieving partner, stepped into the light and spoke words that made headlines tremble. Her first statement. Now imagine it. A press conference called in haste. Reporters buzzing in the room, cameras snapping, microphones shoved forward like weapons. The widow steps in, her face pale, her eyes rimmed red. Some expect tears. Some expect silence. What they didn't expect was fire. Tyler Robinson is not the man who killed my husband, she began. Silence. Not the respectful kind, but the shocked kind. Reporters froze, pins in midair. Producers in studios miles away cursed under their breath, scrambling to rewrite their scripts. Because the narrative, the neat, tidy narrative, had just been blown apart. Ask yourself, what does it take for someone who just lost everything to go against the official story? To risk ridicule, dismissal, even danger? Grief usually silences people. But Erica's grief sharpened her. She wasn't just mourning. She was warning. And here's where the contradictions flood in. Police had claimed Robinson was found near the scene, gun in hand. But Erica insisted Charlie had voiced fears weeks before. He told her, if something happens to me, it won't be random. Chilling words, aren't they? Words that sound less like paranoia and more like prophecy. Think about the weight of that. A husband whispering doubts to his wife. A man who spent his life making enemies, suddenly confessing he didn't trust those around him. And then, weeks later, gunned down in front of a crowd. Does that sound like coincidence? Or a plan fulfilled? The reporters pushed. Mrs. Kirk, are you suggesting an inside job? She didn't flinch. She didn't stammer. Her voice cracked, but it carried. Yes. One word. And with that one word, she cracked the dam. The backlash was immediate. Headlines the next day painted her as unstable, grief-stricken, delusional. Widow in denial. Grieving wife lashes out. But others listened. Others remembered the inconsistencies. The missing footage. The contradictory eyewitnesses. The timeline that didn't add up. And Erica's words turned their doubts into certainty. Now pause. If you were in her shoes, would you have done the same? Or would you have swallowed the official story, too broken to fight? That's the difference. Erica didn't swallow it. She spat it out. And her statement wasn't just defiance, it was strategy. Because she knew the moment she opened her mouth, she couldn't take it back. And once spoken, those words lived forever. Online. In articles. In whispers across the country. Erica's voice became a thorn in the side of the official story. But here's the emotional punch. She didn't just speak as a widow. She spoke as a witness. She had been there. She had seen the chaos firsthand. And what she saw didn't match what she was being told. She spoke about security gaps, entrances left unguarded, staff members missing at key moments. She spoke about how fast authorities moved, how neatly they tied it all together, how suspicious that neatness felt. Grief doesn't give you clarity, she said. But betrayal does. And betrayal became the word no one could escape. Think about the ripple effect. Supporters who once trusted the official line began to question it. Detractors, already skeptical, latched on. And within hours, Erica's statement wasn't just a grieving widow's outburst. It was a movement. Hashtags, videos, live streams. Everyone suddenly had an opinion, and Erica had ignited it. But here's the part most missed. Her tone. It wasn't rage. It wasn't hysteria. It was conviction. The quiet conviction of someone who knew she was putting herself in danger and chose to anyway. Doesn't that give you chills? Because ask yourself, if she were wrong, if Robinson truly were guilty, why risk it? Why make herself a target? Why challenge the system? The answer is simple. Because she knew something the rest of us didn't. And that something pointed straight to betrayal. Not from strangers. Not from random shooters. But from within Charlie's own circle. Her words became the line in the sand. On one side, those who clung to the official story. On the other, those who believed Erica and began to dig deeper. And as the divide grew sharper, so did the danger. Because if Erica was right, then the Real killers were still out there. Watching, listening. And the one person daring to expose them was the woman they had already made a widow. That's the chilling reality. Her statement wasn't just grief. It was defiance in the face of power. And power does not forgive defiance. And as Erica walked off that stage, reporters shouting, cameras flashing, the air crackling with tension, one thought hung heavy in the air. If she was willing to say this now, what would she reveal next? And what she revealed next would strike even closer to home. Because if Erica's first statement cracked the foundation of the official story, her follow-up shattered it. She didn't just say Tyler Robinson wasn't guilty. She began asking why Charlie had been killed at all. And the answers she pointed toward weren't random. They were deliberate. They were personal. They were drenched in motive. So let's dig into it. The motives and suspicions swirling around this case. Have you ever noticed how in high-profile tragedies, the first explanation is always the simplest? A lone gunman. A random act. A tragedy no one could have predicted. That's what we were told about Charlie Kirk's death. But Erica refused to let that narrative stand. Because she knew Charlie. She knew his fears, his enemies, and his secrets. And when she began to speak, the word betrayal came up again and again. Think about Charlie's life for a moment. 31 years old. Founder of Turning Point USA. A man who built his career on division, on hard lines, on challenging the establishment. For some, he was a hero. For others, a villain. But for everyone, he was a force. And forces like that don't live quietly. They make enemies, lots of them. Political rivals. Former allies. Even people within his own circle. And here's where it gets chilling. Erica claimed Charlie had confided in her. I don't trust everyone around me anymore, he told her just weeks before the shooting. That wasn't paranoia, it was a warning. A man who thrived in conflict suddenly doubting his inner circle? That speaks volumes. So who could the suspects be if not Robinson? Let's explore the possibilities. First, political enemies. Charlie had spent years attacking institutions, movements, and public figures. He exposed corruption, at least in his view. He called out universities, Hollywood, the White House itself. Enemies at that level don't just argue, they retaliate. Could his death have been payback, staged to look like a random act? Second, financial betrayal. Turning Point USA wasn't just a movement, it was a machine. Millions in donations, high-profile backers, contracts, deals. Where money flows, corruption follows. Could Charlie have uncovered something inside his own empire? Could someone have feared exposure and decided silencing him was the only way? Third, betrayal from within. Erica's most chilling suspicion. That someone Charlie trusted, someone close enough to know his schedule, his vulnerabilities, his weaknesses, turned on him. Ask yourself, who had access to him? Who knew where he would be, when he would be speaking, how security was set up? That kind of information doesn't come from strangers. It comes from insiders. And then there's the strangest contradiction of all, Robinson himself. His supposed motive was vague at best. Police claimed he was radicalized, but his online presence didn't match the profile. No clear manifesto. No detailed threats. Just a man with a troubled past. Doesn't it feel like he was chosen because he fit the outline, not because he fit the crime? But here's where Erica's words cut deepest. She didn't just dismiss Robinson. She pointed directly at the possibility of orchestration. Charlie wasn't just killed, she said. He was silenced. Silenced. That word carries weight. It suggests not an accident, not a random act, but intent. Intent with motive. Intent with planning. Intent with betrayal. Now pause here. Imagine you're Erica, sitting in your home after the funeral, staring at the headlines. The man you love is gone. The official story makes no sense. You start to connect the dots. The missing footage, the suspiciously fast arrest, the people who seemed too calm, too rehearsed in their responses. Would you stay quiet? Or would you start asking the same questions Erica did? And the questions only get darker. What was Charlie planning to say at Utah Valley University that night? Was there something in his speech, something that never got delivered, that threatened someone powerful? We may never know, because those words died with him. But Erica hinted that Charlie had drafts, notes, ideas he was planning to share. And those notes? They've never been released. Doesn't that make you wonder? Because if the truth of his death is tied to what he was about to reveal, then this wasn't just an attack on Charlie Kirk the man. It was an attack on Charlie Kirk the message. And here's the irony. The more authorities insisted it was Robinson, the more suspicious it looked. The harder they pushed the narrative, the less people trusted it. And Erica's voice became the counterweight. They want you to believe this was random. It wasn't. They want you to believe this was quick justice. It wasn't. They want you to stop asking questions. Don't. Her defiance lit a fire. And that fire spread quickly. Online forums buzzed with theories. Students who had been silenced started speaking again. Even some members of Turning Point USA began whispering doubts. The facade was crumbling. But here's the emotional beat that hits hardest. Betrayal isn't just about enemies. It's about those you thought were friends. And when Erica used the phrase, inside job, she wasn't talking about strangers lurking in the shadows. She was talking about people who knew Charlie, who smiled with him, who shook his hand, who walked beside him. And that realization cut deeper than any bullet. Because if Erica was right, then Charlie didn't just die at the hands of an enemy. He died at the hands of a traitor. Now let me ask you, what's worse? Losing someone you love to random violence? Or losing them because someone they trusted decided to betray them? Which wound cuts deeper? Which one haunts longer? And Erica's suspicion that it was betrayal from within would soon grow from whispers into undeniable evidence. But evidence has consequences. And when the first cracks of proof appeared, it didn't just confirm Erica's fears. It pulled the mask off people who had been standing right next to Charlie all along. And when Erica's suspicions started to ripple through the public, the shockwaves hit hardest at the very place Charlie built from scratch, Turning Point USA. The organization that had been his life's work, his battlefield, his platform, suddenly found itself in turmoil. Let's start with a simple question. What happens to a movement when its leader is killed under mysterious circumstances? Do people rally tighter, stronger, more united? Or do cracks appear, exposing fractures that were already there? For Turning Point USA, it was both. On the surface, they appeared united, posting sleek graphics with Charlie's face, issuing statements about justice and legacy. But behind the polished press releases, something uglier brewed. Picture it. Staffers whispering in back rooms. Emails sent and then deleted. Tensions rising between factions who disagreed on how to handle Erica's defiance. Some wanted her silenced. Others wanted her embraced. Some feared her words, while others secretly agreed. A storm was building, and it was happening inside the very walls of the empire Charlie had created. Here's the contradiction. Turning Point USA prided itself on being bold, unafraid of the truth. Yet when Erica raised her voice, when she pointed out the inconsistencies, the organization scrambled. Not to investigate, but to suppress. Why? What were they so afraid of? Let's dig deeper. Turning Point wasn't just a political nonprofit. It was a brand, a machine, a funnel of millions in donations, tied to some of the most powerful figures in America. Politicians, billionaires, influencers, they all had stakes in its survival. And when money and power are on the line, the truth becomes dangerous. And that's where the suspicions cut sharpest. Erica hinted that Charlie had been asking too many questions. About finances, about loyalty, about deals made in the dark. Could his death have been less about ideology and more about money? Doesn't that possibility make your stomach twist? Now pause. Imagine you're one of Charlie's lieutenants. You've worked under him for years. You know the donors, the contracts, the secrets. And suddenly, Charlie is gone, and Erica is pointing fingers inward. Do you panic? Do you lash out? Or do you start maneuvering for power, hoping to secure your position before the truth surfaces? That's exactly what began to happen. While Erica was grieving, others were plotting. Leadership battles broke out. Some whispered that the board wanted to distance itself from Erica altogether. Others claimed internal audits were being quietly buried. And every move they made only fueled suspicion. Because here's the irony. The harder they tried to control the story, the less control they had. Staffers leaked information. Former allies spoke out. Students questioned the narrative, and Erica, standing alone against the machine, looked less like a grieving widow and more like a whistleblower. And that's when the most chilling detail emerged. Charlie had warned her. Weeks before his death, he told Erica he didn't trust everyone inside his organization. He mentioned names. He mentioned deals. And he left her with a haunting warning. If something happens to me, look inside first. Think about that. A man predicting his own betrayal. A man silenced before he could reveal what he knew. And a wife now forced to carry the weight of his words. Now, what happens when an empire built on loyalty is accused of betrayal? Chaos. Pure chaos. Donors began to hesitate. Some threatened to pull funding unless Turning Point contained the scandal. Others leaned in, demanding answers. The base of supporters split, half siding with Erica, half clinging to the official story. And the media? They circled like vultures, amplifying every rumor, every crack, every whisper. This wasn't just grief anymore. It was civil war. And as the organization fractured, Erica's voice grew louder. She didn't back down. She doubled down. She named inconsistencies. She challenged the board. She hinted at documents Charlie had left behind. And every time she spoke, Turning Point's polished image cracked a little more. But here's the emotional punch. Imagine being Erica in that storm. Alone. Surrounded by people who once smiled at you, now glaring, plotting, whispering. Knowing that the very people who once embraced your husband might have played a role in his death. Would you crumble? Or would you fight? She chose to fight. And her fight lit the fuse inside Turning Point USA. Because if she was right, if the betrayal really came from within, then the enemy wasn't some random gunman. The enemy was sitting in their meetings, cashing their checks, smiling for their cameras. And the cracks inside the organization were only the beginning. Because once the public caught wind of those cracks, the questions exploded. If Turning Point was hiding something, what else were they hiding? If Robinson wasn't the shooter, who inside the empire had the motive? And most importantly, how far would they go to keep the truth buried? The organization was in turmoil. The movement was fractured. And Erica, the widow no one expected to speak, had become the lightning rod for a storm bigger than anyone could control. But the real storm wasn't about Turning Point's internal battles. The real storm was about timing. Because Erica's defiance collided with a detail no one could ignore, the 33-hour window. And what happened in that window would raise even darker questions. It's the detail that refuses to fade, the number that echoes in every conversation about Charlie Kirk's death. 33 hours between the moment shots rang out and the moment Tyler Robinson was officially named and paraded before the public. 33 hours that hold more weight than most people realize. So let's ask the question head-on. What really happened during those 33 hours? Picture the timeline. Wednesday evening, Charlie collapses on stage at Utah Valley University. Sirens, chaos, screaming. By late that night, news outlets across Utah and beyond are already running vague headlines. By morning, they're confidently declaring, police close in on a suspect. By the following evening, Robinson's face is everywhere, and authorities insist they've got their man. Fast. Too fast. Because you know how investigations really work. Crime scenes are messy. Witness testimonies contradict each other. Forensics take time. Ballistics don't confirm overnight. And yet, in this case, the timeline moved with uncanny precision, as though someone was more interested in presenting a suspect than finding the truth. Doesn't that feel orchestrated? Now, let's dig into those hours. Witnesses were herded, questioned quickly, then released. Some said they were asked leading questions, almost as if investigators wanted them to say the shooter looked like Robinson. Others reported that their statements were ignored entirely. And some, disturbingly, claimed they were never contacted again, despite standing just yards from the stage. Why would eyewitnesses be silenced? Why would their accounts disappear into the void? Here's another detail. Security footage. There were cameras everywhere, on the stage, in the audience, around the campus perimeter. Yet when footage was released, large chunks were missing. Gaps. Technical malfunctions. Doesn't that seem convenient? As though someone had time to scrub the evidence clean in those crucial 33 hours. And what about Robinson himself? Reports say he was picked up blocks away, disoriented. Some accounts claim he didn't even resist arrest. Yet in those hours before his name was announced, something odd happened. His background was already circulating internally: criminal record, social ties, alleged radical leanings. Almost as though a profile had been waiting, ready to go. Have you noticed how often the perfect suspect emerges in record time? And here's where Erica's voice cuts through the noise again. She asked the same question you're asking right now. How could investigators be so sure, so quickly? Why did they settle on Robinson in barely more than a day, when the crime scene itself was chaos? Because 33 hours wasn't about solving the case. 33 hours was about building a story. Think about it. The nation was in shock. Donors were panicking. Students were demanding answers. Politicians were circling, eager to spin the tragedy to their advantage. Someone had to be blamed. Quickly, neatly, publicly. And Robinson fit the bill. But here's the contradiction. If it really was Robinson, if it really was that simple, then why the missing footage? Why the silenced witnesses? Why the unanswered questions about security lapses? Why the frantic rush to control the narrative? The more you dig into those 33 hours, the more suspicious they become. They weren't just hours. They were an opportunity. An opportunity for someone to clean up, to manipulate, to choose a villain and bury the truth. And Erica wasn't the only one who thought so. Former Turning Point insiders whispered the same suspicions. Students began connecting the dots online. Even some lower-level staff at Utah Valley University admitted off the record that things didn't add up. But publicly, the story stayed the same. Robinson did it. Robinson alone. Robinson case closed. Now imagine being Erica, counting those hours, watching as headlines hardened into fact, feeling the story slip away from her, and knowing, deep down, that every passing minute pulled her further from the truth. 33 hours of silence. 33 hours of manipulation. 33 hours where the truth itself was locked in a cage. Doesn't that sound less like justice and more like choreography? But here's the most chilling part. When Erica finally asked about those 33 hours, where Robinson was, what was happening behind closed doors, she didn't get answers. She got warnings. Stop asking. You're hurting the case. Focus on healing. Words designed to shut her down. Words that only confirmed what she already feared. The truth wasn't lost. The truth was buried. And the burial didn't end with Robinson's arrest. Because what Erica said next, her emotional confession, would rip the mask off entirely. She wasn't just questioning the 33 hours. She was about to expose what those hours really meant. And what they meant would terrify everyone who thought the story was already finished. And when Erica Kirk finally spoke, really spoke, it wasn't calculated. It wasn't polished. It wasn't meant for headlines or cameras. It was raw. It was trembling. It was the kind of confession that only comes when the weight of silence becomes unbearable. Her emotional confession. Now pause for a moment and imagine the scene. A widow sitting in her living room, blinds drawn, the house too quiet without Charlie's booming voice. The photos on the wall staring back at her. The smell of flowers from well-wishers already turning stale. The press still circling outside, their lenses waiting for any sign of a crack. And then, in a hushed voice, to a close friend who later leaked the conversation, Erica admitted the unthinkable. It wasn't Robinson. It was someone on the inside. Charlie told me he felt betrayed. There it was. Not whispered suspicion. Not vague doubt. A confession. A declaration. And it wasn't just grief talking. It was memory. She recalled Charlie's warnings, the unease in his voice in the weeks leading up to the event. He had sensed something. He had told her outright. If they come for me, it won't be strangers. Doesn't that make your skin crawl? Because it suggests Charlie knew. He didn't know when or how, but he knew betrayal was circling. And Erica, carrying the weight of his words, couldn't keep silent anymore. Her confession hit harder than her first public statement. Because this wasn't about doubting Robinson's guilt. It was about naming the crime for what it was, an inside job. She said it plainly. The people around Charlie, the people closest to him, they weren't protecting him. They were watching him. Think about that. The very circle he had built, the colleagues he had trusted, the organization he had given his life to, turned against him. At least, that's what Erica was confessing. And the contradictions only deepened. Robinson's supposed weapon? Ballistics reports whispered to journalists behind the scenes didn't match cleanly with the bullet retrieved from the scene. Security logs? Incomplete. And the so-called eyewitness who positively identified Robinson? Their statement shifted over time. Yet the case held firm. Doesn't that sound less like evidence and more like fabrication? Now here's the emotional beat that makes this confession unforgettable. As Erica recounted Charlie's last weeks, she broke down. Not just from grief, but from guilt. She admitted she had brushed off some of his fears. That when Charlie told her he didn't trust certain people inside Turning Point anymore, she tried to reassure him. "You're overthinking," she had said. And now, sitting alone, she was haunted by those words. That's the cruelty of betrayal. It doesn't just kill the victim. It tortures the survivors with what-ifs. And Erica wasn't alone in her confession. Soon after her words leaked, more whispers emerged. Staffers who had once stayed quiet suddenly remembered details. Security seemed thin that day. "I saw someone near the stage who wasn't supposed to be there." The shooter didn't look like Robinson. One voice became two, then three, then dozens. And Erica's confession gave them courage to speak. But courage has consequences. Because as Erica's emotional words spread, the backlash grew fierce. Commentators mocked her, painting her as unstable. Others accused her of dishonoring her husband's memory. Some even suggested she was endangering herself. And maybe she was. Because the more she spoke, the more she exposed. And yet, she didn't stop. That's the part that's almost unbelievable. Most widows in her position would have retreated, swallowed the pain, let the official story stand. But Erica leaned in. Every time she spoke, she grew bolder. Every time she was silenced, she spoke louder. Her confession wasn't just grief, it was rebellion. Now imagine the risk. If she was right, then the killers weren't strangers. They weren't hiding in shadows. They were right there, smiling in photos, sitting in boardrooms, issuing statements about justice while covering their own tracks. And Erica was standing in front of them, naming them without naming them. That takes a level of courage most of us can't fathom. Her confession reframed everything. Robinson wasn't just the wrong man. He was the cover story, the distraction. The 33-hour window wasn't about investigation. It was about orchestration, cleaning up, fabricating, planting a scapegoat. And as Erica's words spread, the narrative shifted. People stopped asking if Robinson did it. They started asking who inside Turning Point had the most to gain. Because betrayal always has a motive. Always. And the more Erica spoke, the clearer it became. Charlie hadn't just been killed. He had been eliminated, silenced, cut down by people who feared what he might expose. Her emotional confession wasn't the end of the story. It was the spark that lit a fire under journalists, supporters, even some of Charlie's former allies who suddenly began to distance themselves from Turning Point's leadership. But fire spreads fast. And once the idea of an inside job caught flame, it pointed to the one theory no one wanted to say out loud. That the betrayal wasn't just inside Turning Point. It was orchestrated, planned, and executed with precision. And that's where the inside job theory truly began to take shape. Because let's face it, random shootings don't look this clean. They don't produce a ready-made suspect in 33 hours. They don't involve missing footage, silenced witnesses, and grieving widows pointing fingers at insiders. No, random shootings are messy. But this smelled planned. So let's break it down. If it was an inside job, what does that actually mean? First, access. The shooter knew where Charlie would be, what time he would be there, and how security was set up. That kind of intel doesn't come from guesswork. It comes from someone on the inside, someone with clearance. Who had that access? Staffers, organizers, security contractors, even close allies. Second, execution. Eyewitnesses described the shooter moving with precision, too precise for a so-called unstable drifter like Robinson. Some said he aimed with training. Others noted how quickly he disappeared into the chaos. That level of execution screams preparation. And preparation requires planning. Third, the cover-up. Missing security footage. Contradictory testimonies discarded. Police statements that sounded more like press releases. And the speed, my God, the speed with which Robinson was named. Doesn't that feel less like investigation and more like orchestration? Now, imagine Erica sitting with these facts. Imagine her piecing them together, night after night, unable to sleep, haunted by Charlie's last words. If something happens to me, look inside first. She wasn't inventing the inside job theory. She was confirming it. She was validating what Charlie himself had feared. And once she spoke, others followed. A former Turning Point intern went online, claiming he saw unfamiliar faces near the stage in the moments before the shooting. A campus staff member admitted entrances were left unguarded. And then came the bombshell. Leaked emails suggesting internal discussions about heightened security concerns in the weeks before the event. Concerns that were mysteriously ignored. Ignored? Or deliberately brushed aside? That's the question. Because ignoring a threat is negligence. But brushing it aside, knowing what could happen? That's conspiracy. And here's the contradiction that stings. Turning Point USA went into overdrive to prove their loyalty to Charlie's memory. Memorial events, glossy tribute videos, endless posts about justice. Yet at the same time, they pushed Erica into the shadows. Why would an organization sideline the widow of their co-founder? Unless her words threatened their survival. Betrayal doesn't come from strangers. Betrayal comes from the ones sitting closest to you at the table. And the theory snowballed. Analysts began comparing the case to other high-profile inside jobs in history. Moments when leaders were betrayed not by enemies, but by supposed friends. The parallels were chilling. Abraham Lincoln, betrayed by someone who knew the theater layout. Julius Caesar, stabbed by his own senators. And now, Charlie Kirk, silenced in front of a crowd while insiders smiled for the cameras. Ask yourself, if Erica hadn't spoken, would anyone have questioned it? Or would Robinson still be sitting in a cell, the perfect fall guy for a crime he didn't commit? And that's the heart of it. The inside job theory isn't just about who pulled the trigger. It's about who wanted the world to believe Robinson did. It's about who stood to gain from Charlie's death. Because make no mistake, someone gained. Power doesn't vanish when a leader falls. It transfers. And the faster Robinson was named, the faster the machine moved on, the easier it was for someone else to step into Charlie's shadow. Now pause here. Imagine the weight on Erica's shoulders. She wasn't just grieving. She was accusing. Accusing powerful people with money, influence, networks. And with every word she spoke, she put a target on her own back. Doesn't that make you wonder how much courage or desperation it took to keep speaking? Her confession gave birth to a movement. Students held vigils demanding the real story. Online groups dissected every second of footage, every gap, every inconsistency. Even some of Charlie's donors began pressing for answers. The theory of an inside job wasn't just speculation.